On this vote, the yeas are 303, the nays are 126, 3 recorded as present. 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Section 6 of House Resolution 918, House Resolution 917 is considered as adopted.
Okay. Now, enrolled bills. The chair lays before the House the following enrolled bills.
HR 1734, an act to require the Coordinated National Institute of Standards and Technology, science and research activities regarding illicit drugs containing xylazine, novel synthetic opioids, and other substances of concern and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Montana seek recognition?
Madam Speaker,
The House will be in order.
Madam Speaker, I hereby remove my name as co-sponsor of HR 3721.
Request is granted.
Madam,
What the majority of Americans have. What did the Bidens do to receive the tens of millions of dollars from our enemies around the world? Today's unanimous vote by our conference showed that we are united as a conference. We expect to have people honor our subpoenas. We want to wrap this investigation up, but obviously you get to the deposition phase before you wrap up an investigation. So that's where we are. We're very pleased with the vote today. I think that sent a message loud and clear to the White House. We expect you to comply with our information requests and our subpoenas. With that, I'll turn it over to Chairman Jordan.
on the appropriations bills. As we know, we have looming deadlines, and we all agreed on that. But what we also agreed to was what's written in the law, and that's the FRA numbers on top line. The Senate has been projecting and writing well above that to the, I don't know, billions of dollars. That's not what the law says. And so I came in as the new speaker and I said, again, as the rule of law team, we're going to follow the law. So that's where the negotiation stands. We're awaiting a volley from the other side, should there be one. But the House has done its job. We passed 7 of the 12 approach bills. That's almost 80% of federal funding. 11 of the 12 have made it through the process, if not all the way to the floor. And so we're in a position where we could go to conference committee and negotiate this. Our appropriators want to do so. Our cardinals, as we call them, the chairman of the subcommittees and appropriations, are ready to do the work. But we're awaiting the other team, the other side, the other chamber to come forward with a number that we can agree upon, that we write to, and that's the impasse, and that's what we're waiting on. But the law is the law. Yeah, right front row.
On FISA, can you kind of delve into your thought process going through that? You changed your mind multiple times on exactly whether it be a short-term extension or not, and you changed your mind yesterday on Queen of the Hill situation. Can you just walk us through how that thought process?
I didn't change my mind on FISA. See, FISA is a very important piece of legislation, and Section 702, which would expire at the end of the year, is a really, really important provision because it protects us on the homeland. It protects us from terrorist attacks. It's the tool that we use to uncover those plots when they're being planned, and it's been very, very effective in that measure. And that's why you have conservatives and liberals, progressives, who agree that it's a really important tool. What we all also agree on is that it must be dramatically reformed because it's been abused 287,000 times, I think, between 2020 and 2021. The FBI did queries on American citizens in violation of that law and our basic civil liberties. So we have this very important matter to determine and resolve, and you have lots of different opinions on where that is. We have 2 committees of jurisdiction, Judiciary and the Intelligence Committee, who have worked up different measures, different bills. We've only had the text of those for 4 or 5 days, something like that, about a week. And here we are near the end of the deadline. Now, as soon as I became speaker, we knew the deadline was coming, and I brought those committees together. They were working from a working group, a task force that was put forward by 3 members of both committees that worked for about 6 months. Y'all may have seen, I think you have, they came up with about 45 reforms that would resolve all of these issues. But about 4 or 5 of those key reforms, there's a disagreement between the 2 committees. We're working towards consensus, but this is a very, very serious matter. This isn't some minor policy in our law. This is about keeping Americans safe. And so we take the responsibility seriously. As recently as last night, we were in a room with all the interested parties and House Republicans there. And there's still some disagreement about a couple of those key provisions. So I am not one who wants to rush this. I don't think we can make a mistake in this. I think we've got to do it right. And so we're going to allow the time to do that. So having a short-term extension on the NDAA allows us the time to work not only in our own chamber, but with the other chamber as well, to come forward with a compromise provision that will not only keep us safe, but will also safeguard our civil liberties. Both of those objectives must be achieved, and that's why it's taken a long time. Again, as I said at the outset, and I'll close with this, democracy is messy sometimes, but we have to get it right. We're the greatest deliberative body in the world, and we're going to do our job and do it well. Sometimes it takes more time than we would like, but it's worth it to get it right, especially on a product as important as FISA. So that's what we're going to do. Thank you all for the time. Thank you, Mr. Leader. I appreciate that year in review. There is a lot to discuss and to remember. It seems like this year was multiple years, doesn't it? A lot going on. Look, democracy is messy sometimes, but we work in the greatest deliberative body in the world, in the history of the world, the United States Congress, and the House Republican majority is moving the ball forward to continue to lead. I do want to talk about just very briefly this healthcare bill, because this is a big thing. I'm really grateful to Chairwoman Kathy McMorris Rogers and Energy and Commerce, her committee, for their leadership on this important issue. On top of spending $15,000 more annually just to afford basic goods, American families, we all know right now, are struggling. And they have to contend now, of course, with needlessly opaque, inefficient, and an unaffordable healthcare system. We have to do something about that. So the Lower Cost, More Transparency Act that we'll pass is our House Republicans making good on our efforts to bring down the cost of healthcare and empower American people to make their own healthcare decisions and not have the government and bureaucrats in the way. The bill is a broad, bipartisan supported piece of legislation. It arms patients with accurate and transparent information about the cost and care of prescription drugs. That's a big deal, as you've heard discussed here. It supports community health care centers and preserves Medicaid for hospitals that serve rural communities. Many of them I represent in my district in Louisiana. And this is a critical and necessary assistance for rural healthcare providers. Make no mistake about that. And also, this bill is going to expand access to generics and lower cost or lower out-of-pocket costs for our seniors. And they desperately need that relief, and we all know it. And here's the kicker. As was noted, the entire package is fully offset. And so it actually reduces the deficit by more than $700 million. What a concept. House Republicans are committed to making healthcare more affordable and prices more transparent, and we are committed to doing so in a manner that is fiscally responsible.
Under the act from purchasing or offering milk produced by Chinese state-owned enterprises that may be operating here within the United States or elsewhere. As many of us know, in 2008, melamine scandal exposed systemic corruption and disregard for the safety standards within China's own dairy industry. This scandal resulted in the death of 6 infants and sickened thousands more, highlighting the devastating consequences of lax regulations and unethical practices. The evidence is clear. These enterprises pose a serious threat to our consumers' health, our economic security, and our national interests. We can't allow CCP enterprises to export their dangerous practices to our school lunches. This is an issue maintaining American control of critical supply chains that the Chinese state-owned enterprises have no business being in our schools. Florida is one of the largest cattle producers in America, and there's no way I will allow producers in my state to be compromised by the CCP or the PRC. If we fail to act, we risk losing our family farms and jeopardizing the livelihoods of thousands of Americans. This is not about trade isolationism. It's about protecting our children in schools from unsafe products, ensuring fair competition for American producers, and safeguarding our national security. The potential consequences of inaction are simply too great for me to ignore. And the quality and safety of food that we
his speech on January 6, 2021, a crime of inciting violence, or was it protected speech? Incredibly, the university presidents were directed to give a one-word answer, yes or no, and they responded, as Professor Freed said he would have been professionally obligated to do, it depends on context. Regrettably, they took the question as an opportunity to seriously discuss the constitutional implications of a complex question. That was a big mistake. And for that mistake, we are considering a resolution to condemn them and ask them to resign. I also think it's important to put this resolution in context, because in 2017, after white supremacists walked through the campus of University of Virginia shouting, "Jews will not replace us," Democrats on the committee requested a hearing on that incident, and nothing happened. Meanwhile, the one who declared there were good people on both sides has been enthusiastically endorsed. We need to do everything the law allows to address anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, homophobia, and other forms of discrimination on college campuses. This resolution is not a serious effort to advance that cause. I therefore oppose this resolution and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from New York, Conference Chairwoman, Ms. Stefanik.
Gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to Chairwoman Fox for chairing last week's important hearing. There is a reason that last week's hearing, the university presidents of Harvard, Penn, and MIT made history as the most watched congressional testimony in history with over 1 billion views. And that's because their testimony was the most morally bankrupt testimony in the history of the United States Congress. When asked the very specific question, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate your code of conduct on bullying and harassment? The world watched and the world heard their answers in horror. As the president of Harvard, the president, now former of Penn, and the president of MIT equivocated, dehumanized, and failed to answer yes. Anyone with a sliver of decency, humanity, and morality knows that the answer to that question is yes. President Kornbluth of MIT said that such depravity would only be considered harassment depending on the, quote, context. When pressed during her questioning, Penn's president, now former President McGill's response was shocking to the extreme. Quote, if the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment. Finally, Harvard President Gay, whose answer was the same, quote, it depends on the context. It was pathetic, amoral, and inhumane, and by God, the world heard it. And as I said in the hearing, it does not depend on the context. As attacks against Jewish students have skyrocketed on campuses across America, we clearly have tremendous work ahead of us, Mr. Speaker, to address this rot of anti-Semitism that is now rooted in our once premier higher education institutions. And we will not be deterred by this important work. This is why I rise today in support of my bipartisan resolution condemning the rise of anti-Semitism on university campuses around the country and the morally bankrupt testimony of those university presidents.
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
I give the gentlewoman another 30 seconds.
It is only a first step, but it is an important step. I commend my colleagues, Congressman Moskowitz, Majority Leader Scalise, and Congressman Gottheimer for joining to lead this historically important bipartisan effort to stand for moral truth. And I yield back the balance to the chairwoman.
Gentlewoman from North Carolina reserves. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 5 minutes to the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Manning.
Gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank my friend, the gentleman from Virginia, Ranking Member Scott, for recognizing me. Mr. Speaker, as someone who has dedicated most of her career to combating anti-Semitism and as the co-chair of the House Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, I know well that anti-Semitism has been on the rise in our country for years. It was a growing problem before the October 7th Hamas terrorist attack, and sadly, immediately after that savage attack, anti-Semitism has skyrocketed, particularly on college campuses. What we have seen happening on college campuses is outrageous, and too many college and university leaders have totally failed in their moral responsibility.
Are blatant lies. Our investigation has revealed how Joe Biden, participated in and benefited from his family cashing in on the Biden name around the world. Since January, we have learned some of the following. The Bidens created 20 shell companies, most of which were created while Joe Biden was vice president. The Bidens and their associates then raked in over $24 million through these shell companies from China, Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Romania between 2014 and 2019. At least 10 members of the Biden family have benefited or participated in these schemes. The Bidens layered these payments through their bank accounts to hide the sources of the money. The banks even flagged many of these transactions in more than 150 suspicious activity reports to the Treasury Department. One bank investigator was so concerned about Hunter Biden's financial transactions with a Chinese company that he wanted to reevaluate the bank's relationship with him. He noted that his transactions served, and I quote, no current business purpose, end quote. That's what I call a shell company. According to Devin Archer, a Biden family associate, Joe Biden was the brand of the business. The brand showed up. Joe Biden spoke to his son's associates by speakerphone over 20 times, dined with foreign oligarchs and a Burisma executive, and had coffee with his son's Chinese associate, all when he was vice president. Weeks after Joe Biden left the vice presidency, money from this Chinese Communist Party-linked entity began to make its way to the bank accounts of several Biden family members. Based on one Biden associate's interview with the FBI, these payments were sent to the Bidens as a quote, thank you. Ask any Justice Department public corruption investigator about the importance of payments received after one leaves public office. It's a hallmark of corruption. We are now at a pivotal moment in our investigation. We will soon depose and interview several members of the Biden family and their associates about these influence peddling schemes. But we are facing obstruction from the White House. The White House is seeking to block key testimony from current and former White House staff. It's also withholding thousands of records from Joe Biden's time as vice president.
Gentleman's time has
President
expired.
Biden must be held accountable for his lies, corruption, and obstruction. I urge my colleagues to support this important and necessary resolution. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, well, Mr. Speaker, I need a map to get out of the rabbit hole that Mr. Coma just took us down. But if you want to know what an impeachable offense looks like, here it is. When that man, wannabe dictator, told that angry, violent mob to attack this Capitol building where we all are right now to overturn a free and fair election. This is what a smoking gun looks like. I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on Oversight and Accountability, Mr. Raskin.
Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker. You know, the reason mysteries are called whodunits is because they start with a crime and then you have to try to figure out who did it. The Biden impeachment investigation isn't a whodunit. It's a what is it? It's like an Agatha Christie novel where the mystery is what's the crime? And that gets very tedious very fast. After 11 months of this, no one can tell us what President Biden's crime was, much less where it happened, when it happened, what the motive was, who the perpetrators were, or who the victims were. Maybe the funniest thing I've ever seen in Congress was yesterday in the Rules Committee when Congressman Neguse kept asking Congressman Reschenthaler what the crime was, and Reschenthaler, who's not on the Oversight Committee and is apparently just waking up to the joke, kept saying he didn't know what it was, but that's why we need an impeachment investigation to find out. And Neguse kept asking him, but what will the impeachment investigation be looking for? And finally, Reschenthaler said, a high crime or misdemeanor, and Neguse said, yes, but which one? Now, Neguse, of course, was involved in a real impeachment investigation of a real presidential offense, the incitement of a violent political insurrection against this Congress, against the Vice President of the United States, against the Constitution, and against the election of 2020. We did not need Sherlock Holmes and a magnifying glass to find the presidential crime with Donald Trump. It came right into this House and smashed us in the face. Now, it's true Chairman Comer has collected a mountain of evidence over the last 11 months, tens of thousands of pages of documents, dozens of hours of interviews with government officials, but all of it clearly shows that Biden committed no crime. Even their own witnesses that they called to the only public hearing they had said there is not remotely enough evidence to justify impeachment. Chairman Comer has bragged on Fox News about procuring 100% compliance with his subpoenas. So forget about obstruction, which I hear them muttering about. today. Mr. Speaker, I played a game with the little kids in our family at Thanksgiving. I asked them whether they'd seen my hen weigh. And when they said, "What's a hen weigh?" I said 4 or 5 pounds. It's a dad joke, and some of the bigger kids got it. But when I asked the little kids, like 3 or 4, if they'd seen my hen weigh, they said, "What's a hen weigh?" And I said 3 or 4 pounds, and they started looking for it. And when the other kids came along and asked what they were doing, they said, "We're looking for Uncle Jamie's hen weigh." And then for hours, they were looking everywhere for my hen weigh, under the sofa and under the chairs. And it could go on for days like that. Mr. Speaker, we're all looking for the Republican Party's hen weigh. It just weighs 3 or 4 pounds, but it's costing us tens of millions of dollars. So please forgive me for spoiling the party here, but I want to say this to America. There is no hen weigh. And this stupid, blundering investigation is keeping us from getting any real work done for the people of America. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to my good friend, the distinguished chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Jordan of Ohio.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding. This is a story as old as the hills. You got a politician who does certain things. Those actions then benefit his family financially, and then there's an effort to conceal it and sweep it under the rug. The best example is to go back to the Ukrainian energy company Burisma. 4 key facts about Hunter Biden's involvement with this company and Joe Biden's involvement. First, Hunter Biden gets put on the board of Burisma. Second, he's not qualified to be on the board of Burisma. Don't take my word for it. He said it himself. Third, he's asked by the executives of Burisma, can you weigh in with Washington, with D.C. to help alleviate the pressure we are under? 3 days later, the Vice President of the United States, now President Joe Biden, goes to Ukraine and conditions American tax dollars for Ukraine on the firing of the prosecutor who was applying the pressure to the company Hunter Biden was on the board of. That's why we're going with an official impeachment inquiry vote today. That's why this needs to be investigated. There are 2 resolutions we're considering. Resolution 918 and Resolution 917 incorporated if we pass 918. 3 names mentioned in those 2 resolutions. One name, of course, is Joe Biden, President of the United States. But the other 2 names in Resolution 917 are 2 DOJ tax lawyers, Mark Daley and Jack Morgan. 2 guys we want to talk to that the Biden Justice Department says we're not going to let you talk to them. With this vote, we think we get to talk to those individuals. And here's why it's important. These guys, these 2 individuals initially said there should be felony tax charges for 2014, 2015 in the Hunter Biden investigation. And that's important because those are the years when the bulk of the income from Burisma came to Hunter Biden. They initially said there should be felony tax charges for those years. Then they changed their position. 8 months later, they changed their position. We want to know why. Why did you do that? Why did you let the statute of limitations, intentionally let the statute of limitations lapse for those years? My theory is it's one thing to charge Hunter Biden on a gun charge in Delaware. It's another thing to say we're not going to charge, another thing to charge him on Burisma tax years, because that gets you to Joe Biden. That gets you to the White House. That's why we need this vote. The impeachment power, as the chairman said, is a power that solely resides in the House. When you have a majority of the House of Representatives go on record, that sends a message. We think we get timely participation from the witnesses we need to talk to and the documents Mr. Comer has been seeking. Finally, I would say this about this changing story from the White House, this changing story from the Justice Department. Today, Hunter Biden did a press conference. He was supposed to be in a deposition. He did a press conference. And at that press conference, he said, my father was not financially involved in the business. Well, that's an important qualifier. We haven't heard that. For 3 years, we haven't heard that. All we've heard is Joe Biden had no involvement. Now his son does a press conference when he's supposed to be being deposed and says he wasn't financially involved. Well, what involvement was it? We know there was phone calls, dinners, and meetings. What involvement was it? That's why we want to ask these questions with important witnesses. That's why this resolution is important. I urge a yes vote. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I need to get a decoder ring. I now yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from New Mexico, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for 90 seconds.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, every conspiracy theory we just heard has been debunked, not true, and distorted from the facts. Because this impeachment inquiry is political vengeance carried out by extreme
Mexico is recognized for 90 seconds.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, every conspiracy theory we just heard has been debunked, not true, and distorted from the facts. Because this impeachment inquiry is political vengeance directed by a twice impeached, 4 times indicted president and carried out by extreme MAGA Republicans. Republicans rejected my amendment to require the committees to hold at least one public hearing. Why? Because 11 months and a mountain of evidence and documents gathered so far proves that President Biden respected the rule of law and fought corruption. Republicans want to continue a secret investigation so they can distort the facts. For example, Republicans tried to create a scandal about the $4,140 Hunter paid to his dad in 2018. What really happened? Joe Biden paid his son's truck payments while Hunter struggled with addiction. Hunter paid his dad back. A parent's love is never without pain. A parent doesn't stop loving a child struggling with addiction. Americans will see in those truck payments some of their own attempts to help their struggling kids. Shame on my colleagues for politicizing a parent's pain. Americans know what evidence of an impeachment looks like. The Capitol Police, who were battered and beaten as Trump tried to overturn an election, know what an impeachable offense feels like. This puppet show is more of the same attack on our democracy that we saw here.
Lady's time has expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to my very good friend, distinguished lady from Indiana, Ms. Houchin, also a distinguished member of the Rules Committee.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, today, on the very day Hunter Biden ignored a subpoena from this body, we will vote to take the next critical step in formalizing the House's impeachment inquiry into President Biden. For months, the White House and Hunter Biden have been stonewalling our investigation, trying to hide the truth. And this stonewalling is what's caused us to be here today. Like Chairman Cole said yesterday, it's deeply sad. It's a sad day, not something any of us want to be doing on this House floor, but it has become necessary. Following today's floor vote on HRES 918, the committees on oversight, accountability, ways and means, and judiciary will have greater legal position and subpoena power to fully investigate allegations of influence peddling and wrongdoing by President Biden, his family, and his associates. The American people deserve transparency and accountability. They deserve the truth. And that's exactly what they're going to get from this Republican House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I should remind the gentlelady that Hunter Biden was here today. He wants to testify in public. But Republicans said no because they want to do it behind closed doors so they can go on Fox News and cherry pick facts and figures and distort the truth. Mr. Speaker, Republicans aren't interested in transparency in this investigation. And apparently the Rules Committee isn't either. In our markup yesterday, Democrats offered 9 amendments. They were all voted down by Republicans, but in the official Rules Committee report, contrary to years of committee practice and tradition, the majority left out descriptions of those amendments. So instead of reading, for example, that Republicans defeated an amendment to add, quote, open and transparent to investigative proceedings, members of the public will only see that Republicans voted down, quote, amendment number 4. Instead of defeating an amendment requiring committees to hold an open hearing as part of the investigation, the record will show that the majority simply voted down, quote, amendment number 5. Republicans are literally hiding Democratic amendments about transparency. You cannot make this stuff up. And this is especially shocking to me because it is so aligned with the way this committee has run historically under this chairman. And I'm deeply disappointed. And I hope that this isn't an indication of how the majority intends to operate in the future. So to make sure that these amendments show up somewhere in the historical record, I'm going to put the summaries in the congressional record. And I ask unanimous consent to insert for the record the summaries of our 9 amendments, which Republicans intentionally left out of the Rules Committee report.
Without objection. Gentleman reserves.
I reserve, yeah.
Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just quickly, I yield myself such time as I may consume. Just for the record,
all these amendments are on the website of the Rules Committee. It's not like they're mysteriously hidden someplace. They're in plain view on the website of the Rules Committee. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to my good friend, the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman, also a distinguished member of the Rules Committee.
Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Speaker. I rise today in full support of this impeachment inquiry. I hope all the public tunes in to the Rules Committee yesterday. My question, what are you scared of? What are you scared of? What facts do you not want to come out? That was so evident. You spent more time quoting Donald Trump, the January 6th, anything but the facts about what Hunter Biden and his family did. The checks don't make themselves up that are written to this family. The LLC accounts don't make themselves up. It's facts. And what more to come out that you're hiding is so evident. This resolution follows the bar set by Democrats during the impeachment proceedings in 2019. We're playing by the same rules the Democrats set. If Democrats thought this process was fair for President Trump, they should think it's fair for President Biden. And no, the Bidens are the evidence, I think, as things come out, will finally show what the trail is and the fact that there are consequences. You cannot just not say you're innocent and not have to prove it. So I fully support this inquiry, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair. Gentleman from Oklahoma Reserve, gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, and Mr. Speaker, members should be advised that Joe Biden, not Hunter Biden, is President of the United States. I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on the Judiciary, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, we all know why we're here today. The majority has no accomplishments to speak of. Their own members have said so, and the right wing is getting restless. So since they can't legislate and run on anything positive, they've decided to tear down President Biden instead. They have no evidence, of course, to support this inquiry, but since this majority never lets facts get in the way of a good set of Fox News talking points, here we are. Dozens of witnesses have sat for transcribed interviews, and every one of those witnesses tells us the same thing. There was no political interference in the Hunter Biden case. Nobody at the Department of Justice ever blocked the special counsel from bringing charges. Unfortunately, the American public does not have most of this story because Chairman Jordan refuses to release the transcripts from our interviews. In fact, of the 85 interviews our committee has conducted so far, he has released exactly 1 transcript. He knows that if he releases any more than that, his preferred narrative will crumble. The evidence simply does not support these baseless charges. So why is the MAGA wing of the Republican Party resorting to this political stunt? 2 words: Donald Trump. The likely nominee of the Republican Party, who faces 91 criminal charges in various courts, was also impeached not once but twice, and we had evidence. And whenever the former president is accused of wrongdoing, his favorite move is to accuse his opponent of doing the same. For this to work, of course, he needs President Biden to be impeached too. And so he asked his enablers in Congress to invent an impeachment, even if there's not a shred of evidence to back it up. And even if everything Chairman Comer said were true, which none of it is, an impeachable offense committed by Vice President Biden would not be under our Constitution grounds for impeaching President Biden. This is political hackery, not serious work. We should be focused on doing the work of the American people and not be distracted by pernicious nonsense. I urge all members to vote no on this ridiculous resolution. Now I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to my good friend, distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, also a member of the Rules Committee.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank the Speaker. I thank the Chairman. This is an impeachment inquiry defined as an act of asking for information. Nothing more, nothing less. The inquiry is to further investigate at least 3 things. 1, the extent to which Joe Biden, as vice president, was involved with the flow of millions of dollars from foreign companies and interests in China and Ukraine into the Biden family, into numerous shell companies, including Hunter and his involvement. Devin Archer testified the vice president was in fact at Hunter's business meetings, and there are numerous emails and other evidence indicating that the big guy or dad was involved. 2, the extent to which Joe Biden has lied, to the extent of his involvement that Hunter all but acknowledged today when avoiding his deposition in a show press conference on the Capitol steps by carefully saying his dad was not involved financially in his businesses. 3, the extent to which Biden and his administration have obstructed justice by preventing Jack Morgan and Mark Daley with the Department of Justice from testifying to their involvement in DOJ and IRS deciding to slow walk 2014 tax charges and 2015 charges so the statute of limitations would lapse. All the more interesting in light of Hunter Biden being indicted just last week on 9 counts of tax offenses for failing to pay $1.4 million in back taxes after writing off hookers and sex clubs. All of which was only brought to light because a judge called the bluff of Weiss's sweetheart deal. By only providing 14 of 82,000 emails with pseudonyms, of which 29,000 were tied to Biden's family businesses. Third, by limiting the scope of witness testimony from Department of Justice witnesses over and over and over again. This is an impeachment inquiry. That's all. What are my Democratic colleagues afraid of if there's nothing to see there? Maybe that is all the more reason for the inquiry. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on Ways and Means, Mr. Neal.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern.
The
Mr.
gentleman
Speaker,
is recognized for 2 minutes.
I rise in shock and frustration at our Republican colleagues' do-nothing Congress. Seinfeld would have called this the impeachment about nothing. They are leading the most unproductive session since the Great Depression, and after manufacturing crisis after crisis, weeks of trying to choose a speaker and putting their record-breaking economic recovery, which is non-existent, under the spotlight, they think that formalizing a fishing expedition will dress it up enough for the American people to believe it. This is not the work of the Ways and Means Committee. The greatness of this committee has nothing to do with an impeachment proceeding, and how the Ways and Means Committee got involved in this baffles Republican and Democratic members of the committee. The truth is, it's been nearly a year and not a shred of evidence has shown any wrongdoing or interference by Joe Biden. Their recycled conspiracy theories continue to be debunked. They continue to mistake Congress, a legislative body, for a law enforcement body. In their only public hearing, their own witnesses conceded that there isn't evidence to warrant moving forward, which I have submitted to the record, Mr. Speaker. The gentleman from South Carolina said we're trying to hide something. I moved in the Ways and Means Committee to have the whistleblower's testimony done in full public for observation. They turned it down. Meanwhile, we're staring at another Republican government shutdown at the beginning of tax filing season. Enough with this obsession with one person, Joe Biden. The Ways and Means Democrats, we are concerned about all members of the American family, and for the taxpayer that is about to impede it because of the work that's being done on impeachment instead of on tax reform, this is where we find ourselves. Nothing here, no evidence, no wrongdoing after a year, a waste of time for the American people, a waste of time for a Congress that should be addressing the real problems of the American family.
And without objection, the gentleman's request is granted. A gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to my very good friend, distinguished chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Smith.
Gentleman from Missouri is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chairman Cole. President Biden has hidden from the American people his knowledge of and role in his family's overseas business dealings. Even in the face of overwhelming evidence showing his knowledge and involvement, President Biden still refuses to come clean. So far, 2 key DOJ witnesses have failed to show for congressionally subpoenaed depositions after DOJ directed them not to appear. Other witnesses have